You're just a broke soldier. And that firefighter husband of yours doesn't have a damn thing to his name." My mother ground out every word, her eyes dragging over my navy dress uniform like she was sizing up a pile of roadkill. She lunged across the table, ripped the gold-trimmed invitation right out of my hands, and ground her stiletto into it like it carried a disease. "Isabella is marrying a Wall Street billionaire. Tomorrow, hundreds of CEOs will be there," she hissed, chin jutting skyward. "I cannot let them see that a billionaire's bride has a dirt-poor little sister living on a government paycheck. Your poverty will stain this family's image. Stay home." I stood there. My molars bit down so hard I tasted copper in the back of my throat. The blade from my own mother punched through my ribcage with more savagery than any firefight I'd ever walked through. I fastened my coat button, took my husband's rough hand, and walked out that door. Accepted the exile. But she had no idea. 3 hours after that $1 million wedding kicked off, 12 fully armed federal agents blew apart the silence, locked down every exit of my house. The lead agent stepped onto my porch and said 5 words that changed everything. "Washington knows who you are, Lieutenant." But before I tell you why, that night was the only night in my entire life when their upper-class mask got crushed to powder, and who had to pay the price. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and don't go anywhere. Because what happened next, not a single person in my family saw coming. Let me take you back to where it started. That morning, my mother slammed a thick guest list onto the oak table hard enough to rattle the silverware. The tips of her crimson-painted fingernails slid across names I recognized from Forbes covers. Her eyes landed on my Navy service uniform, and her nostrils pinched together like she'd caught a whiff of something rotting in the walls. Without a single warning, she lunged forward and snatched the gold-leafed invitation out of my grip. The card tumbled face down onto the imported Persian rug. Then she did something I will carry to my grave. She lifted the pointed heel of her stiletto and pressed it directly into the center of that invitation. One slow, deliberate grind. The message was coded in pure contempt. "Your place, yours, and your husband's is permanently beneath my shoe." I didn't scream, didn't slam my fist on the table. The combat reflex of a commissioned officer kicked in before anything else. I pulled air deep into my lungs, held it 4 seconds, released in 4. My eyes, razor-edged, now cut sideways to the leather sofa. Isabella, my older sister, same blood running through her veins, sat there dragging a diamond nail file across her index finger. The corner of her mouth curled up in a half-smile of silent approval. She didn't need to say a word. That smirk was a co-signature on the eviction notice. Beside me, David sat motionless. His hands, massive, scarred, calloused from years of gripping fire hoses and dragging strangers out of burning buildings, clamped down on the armrest until every knuckle went bone white. The stillness in that room pressed tighter than the air pressure before a blast. My mother didn't let the silence breathe. She drove another poisoned blade home. A finger dripping with diamond rings jabbed at the ribbon bar on my chest. "Your sister starved herself to earn a seat in this world. Don't you dare use your little poor soldier badge to beg for attention from Richard's people." Every syllable sliced like a straight razor. She was scrubbing away a truth she couldn't afford anyone to find out. The hazard pay I'd wired home from combat zones, money earned while mortar rounds shook the dirt off my helmet, had been quietly siphoned to buy Isabella her first designer handbag. The one she used as bait to hook a billionaire. Enough. I shoved the chair back and stood at full height, the posture of a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. I reached down and snapped the brass button on my coat that had popped loose. Then I looked straight into my mother's eyes and used the voice of an unloaded gun, cold steel, no wasted air. "You're right, Mother." I held her stare without blinking. My military ID card and the burn scars covering my husband's body hold more permanent value than every last piece of trash invitation in this room. Congratulations on your victory. I reached down and took David's rough hand. We walked out. The deadbolt behind us cracked shut, a single metallic snap that severed every remaining illusion about the thing they called family. David didn't speak until we reached the driveway. He opened my truck door, waited for me to climb in, then walked around to the driver's side. His jaw was still locked. The tendon running down the left side of his neck pulsed hard enough to see from across the cab. He turned the key. The old Ford's engine coughed, turned over, coughed again, and caught. The exhaust pipe rattled against its rusted bracket, a sound I knew better than any military cadence. "You okay?" he asked. 2 words. That was David, a man who communicated more in a nod than most people managed in an hour. I didn't answer. My eyes had drifted to his hands on the steering wheel. Hands covered in thick white ridges of scar tissue from third-degree burns he'd earned 2 years ago in a row house fire in East Baltimore. The call had come in at 3 a.m., a family of 5 trapped on the second-floor flames eating through the stairwell. David went up alone when his partner's air tank malfunctioned. He found a 4-year-old girl under a bed unconscious, and he scooped her up with both arms. The ceiling joists gave way at the top of the stairs. Burning timber dropped across both his forearms. He felt his skin melting into the fabric of his gloves. He never let go of that child. He walked down 14 steps of burning staircase with a collapsing ceiling falling on his shoulders, handed the girl to the paramedics on the front lawn, and then passed out on the grass. The surgeons spent 11 hours grafting skin from his thighs onto his hands and forearms. He was back on shift in 9 weeks. He never filed for the department's Medal of Valor. He said he didn't do anything special. Those hands cracked, ugly, mapped with permanent scars were worth more than every hedge fund manager invited to tomorrow's wedding combined. The engine hummed. The truck rattled down the county road, and memory hit me like a rifle butt to the jaw. 10 years ago. I was 18, standing in our kitchen holding a college acceptance letter. Full scholarship, my ticket out. My mother snatched it from my hands, tore it clean in half, and fed both pieces to the fireplace. I watched the paper curl black and disappear. Isabella just borrowed $20,000 for pageant outfits, she said, not even looking at me. You're going to bus tables at the steakhouse and pay that off. Then she pressed her index finger hard into the center of my forehead, right between my eyes. You've got your carpenter father's eyes. I won't let his poverty infect this family. My father, Miguel Vasquez, a furniture maker who built dining tables with his bare hands for $19 an hour in a shop that didn't have air conditioning. He worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. His fingernails were permanently stained with wood stain. He smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and every night he came home, picked me up and sat me on his workbench while he sanded whatever piece he was finishing. He taught me to measure twice. He taught me that the grain of the wood tells you which way to cut. He taught me that the things you build with your own hands carry a part of your soul that money can never replicate. He died when I was 7. A planer blade shattered at the sawmill and a fragment caught his femoral artery. He bled out on the shop floor before the ambulance crossed the railroad tracks. He left behind one thing for me, a small ring he'd carved from a piece of black walnut the night I was born. He'd sanded it smooth with 400 grit paper and rubbed it with beeswax until it glowed. I'd kept that ring in my breast pocket through every deployment, every firefight, every sleepless night in a foreign desert where the sand got into everything except the one pocket I kept sealed. My mother had thrown away every photo of him within a month of his funeral. She replaced his last name with a fabricated story that we were descended from old Castilian aristocracy. A lie she spent the next 2 decades polishing. A lie she needed Isabella to sell to the highest bidder. That night at 18, I swallowed every tear whole, packed exactly 3 sets of clothes into a duffel bag, and walked 6 miles in the dark to the Navy recruiting station. The recruiter looked at my swollen eyes and didn't ask questions. He just slid the paperwork across the counter. The cruelty repeated itself at my own wedding 3 years back. David stood on that altar in his Class A firefighter dress uniform, pressed, polished, proud. No champagne, no ice sculptures. Just 24 of his crew members still carrying the faint smell of smoke and diesel clapping him on the back. My mother sat in the front row, dabbing a handkerchief at her eyes. Anyone watching would have thought she was moved to tears. But I heard her hiss at my aunt in the next seat. What a disgrace. She married a common laborer who doesn't even have a trust fund. She's smearing ash all over my face. She'd also staged a scene the month before the wedding. Showed up at our apartment unannounced, walked through every room, ran a finger across the kitchen counter, and inspected it like a health inspector. Then she turned to David and said in front of me, I hope you understand that marrying my daughter is the only investment you'll ever make that's above your pay grade. David said nothing. He just picked up his fire helmet off the counter and left for his shift. The dent in the kitchen wall where he'd punched it later told me everything his silence didn't. The bleeding never stopped. 1 year ago, while I was pinned in a forward operating base in the Middle East, mortar fire pounding the perimeter every 40 minutes, my phone buzzed. Not a welfare check. Not, "Are you safe?" My mother's voice screeched through static and sand. She demanded I sign authorization to liquidate my entire hazard pay fund and wire it home. The reason Isabella needed a $30,000 Hermes Birkin to flash at Richard's private country club. If she doesn't look the part, she'll lose him, and we'll lose everything. My mother screamed as a round detonated close enough to shake dust off the ceiling above my head. I refused. I told her I would not convert blood money into designer leather. She called me an ungrateful wolf. Then, the line went dead. Back in the truck, I stared at David's scarred hands on that cracked steering wheel. The Ford's heater rattled. The gas gauge needle hovered near empty. I ran my thumb over the wooden ring in my breast pocket, the only inheritance my father left me. And I made a covenant with myself in the silence of that cab. Not a single tear would ever fall again for parasites hiding behind the word family. Not one. No mercy. No exceptions. What my mother never knew, what nobody in that house knew, was what happened 6 years earlier on the other side of the world. An unnamed coastline in the Mediterranean theater. I was 22. A diplomatic convoy traveling without license plates was moving through a contested corridor at dusk. The ambush hit without preamble. Crossfire from elevated positions shredded the outer security vehicles in under 4 seconds. The center SUV, armored unmarked, took a direct hit from an armor-piercing round, flipped 3 times across the sand, and came to rest upside down. Fuel pooled beneath it and caught fire immediately. The entire sector became a kill box with no exit. I was commanding a medical support team 200 meters behind the convoy. The radio on my shoulder barked the order loud and clear. Medical team, hold position. Do not approach the vehicle. Standard protocol. The convoy's VIP protection detail was supposed to handle extraction. But through my binoculars, I could see them, all 4 of them, face down and motionless in the dirt. And I could see a hand. An old man's hand pressing against the cracked window of the burning SUV, fingers splayed wide, pushing with everything left in a body that was running out of time. I ripped the earpiece out, dropped the radio in the sand, drew my sidearm from its thigh holster, and I ran. Every regulation in the book screamed at me to stay put. The tactical calculus was clear. One medic running into an active ambush zone with a pistol against entrenched fighters carrying RPGs was a net negative for the mission. I would almost certainly die. And my death would accomplish nothing except adding one more casualty to a classified report that nobody would ever read. But the calculus didn't account for the hand. That old man's hand pressing against the glass, fingers spread wide, pushing with whatever life was left in a body that had minutes, maybe seconds, before the fire reached the fuel tank. I ran. 200 meters of open ground. No cover. Rounds snapping past my ears, close enough to feel the heat. I ran the zigzag pattern they drill into you at OCS until your legs don't think anymore. My boots chewed through sand and gravel. A round punched the dirt 3 inches from my left foot. I didn't slow down. The heat from the burning vehicle hit me like an open furnace door at 10 meters. I smashed the cracked window with the butt of my pistol, reached in with both hands, and dragged a white-haired man out through the shattered frame. He was bleeding from a gash above his eye. His suit was soaked in fuel. A fragmentation grenade detonated 10 meters to our right. The concussion wave flattened both of us into the sand. I rolled on top of him, covering his body with mine. A piece of shrapnel ripped a 6-inch gash across my left shoulder blade. I could feel the heat of my own blood soaking through my shirt. For the next 4 hours, I lay on top of that man in a shallow depression in the sand, pressing my bare palm against a wound on his neck to keep him from bleeding out. I counted his pulse with my fingers. I talked to him to keep him conscious. I refused to let go when the second wave of fire swept the area. When the extraction helicopter finally touched down and the paramedics pulled me off him, my arms had locked into position. They had to pry my fingers open. 2 days later, in a field hospital smelling of antiseptic and diesel, 3 men in black suits walked into my room. They set a heavy briefcase on my bedside table. Inside, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash. Behind them, a colonel held a velvet case containing what he described as a nomination for the nation's highest military honor. I turned them all down. I did what any soldier would do. I followed the oath. I asked for the operation file to be sealed and classified. No public record, no press, no family notification. The man I pulled from that burning wreck, I learned his name only from the classified debrief. Arthur Sterling, former United States Secretary of State, the single most powerful financial broker on Wall Street. The man whose phone calls made or broke entire corporations. My mother spent the next 6 years calling me a broke nobody. She had no idea, not one clue, that the daughter she spat on was carrying a secret that could reshape the entire power structure of her precious high society world. The morning of Isabella's mega wedding, while 500 guests in silk and diamonds assembled at a Lakeside, Virginia estate, I chose a different destination. I put on my Navy service uniform, climbed into the truck alone, and drove to Arlington National Cemetery. I walked slowly between rows of white marble headstones, thousands of them identical, perfectly aligned, stretching to the horizon in every direction. No one buried here cared how many hedge funds you managed. No one here asked about your net worth. Here, a human being's value was measured in one currency, only what they were willing to sacrifice for someone else. I stopped in front of a stone I visited every year. Sergeant First Class Alejandro Reyes, killed covering his squad's retreat in Kandahar, 23 years old. His mother still sent me a Christmas card every December with a photo of his daughter, a girl he'd never met, born 6 weeks after the RPG round that sent him home in a flag-draped box. I knelt down, brushed a dead leaf off the base of the stone, and pressed 2 fingers against the carved letters of his name. Cold marble. That's what sacrifice feels like when you touch it. Not warm, not soft, not wrapped in a bow. Just cold and permanent and heavier than anything a civilian will ever hold in their hands. Behind me, a wooden cane tapped against the asphalt path. I didn't need to turn around. Master Chief Robert Dawson, retired 68 years old, face cross-hatched with scars from 3 decades of combat deployments, left arm replaced below the elbow, with a titanium prosthetic after an IED in Ramadi, stepped up beside me. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the American flag snapping in the wind above the cemetery. He'd been coming here every Tuesday morning for 11 years. Rain, snow, 100-degree heat. He never missed. Your posture is regulation perfect, Lieutenant. Dawson rasped his voice, thick with decades of gun smoke and black coffee. But your breathing pattern is telling me your mind is bleeding on a different front. Ambushed, sir, by my own mother. The words came out flat like a field report. Dawson struck his cane hard into the grass. Without warning, he reached up to his own neck, unclasped a blackened dog tag hanging from a steel chain. One he'd worn for 30 years, the tag of a partner who died in his arms in Fallujah, and pressed it firmly into my palm. The metal was ice cold. Feel that weight, Vasquez. That is the price of freedom. Your mother couldn't lift it with both hands. He swung his titanium arm and thumped it square against my left chest, right over my heart. The impact rang through my ribs. Honor is forged in blood. Traitors always dig their own graves with their own vanity. They don't need your help. Stand tall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from David, a photo. The screen showed a styrofoam box sitting on our porch steps. I recognized my mother's handwriting on a red ink note taped to the lid. I couldn't read the words from the thumbnail, but I didn't need to. The gesture was clear enough. Even now, from miles away, she was swinging. I shoved the phone back into my pocket. Looked Dawson in the eye. Yes, sir. My voice cracked across the headstones like a rifle report. My spine straightened to full extension. Every ounce of self-pity, every shred of weakness from being disowned by my own blood, I crushed it under the heel of that single bark. I snapped my heels together, pivoted, and marched out of the cemetery with steps that left dents in the gravel. The shield was forged. The armor was sealed. I was ready for whatever was coming. 3 in the afternoon. Our small house sat in suffocating quiet. The television was tuned to a local channel carrying live coverage of the wedding at the Virginia estate. Camera drones swept across the manicured grounds. Isabella floated through the frame in a gown crusted with what the commentator breathlessly called 400 hand-sewn diamonds. My mother orbited the VIP tables, bowing her head and refilling wine glasses for men who managed more money than some countries. I sat at our kitchen table with my service pistol disassembled into 11 pieces on an oilcloth. One by one, I cleaned each component: barrel, slide, recoil, spring, guide rod. The dry, precise clicking of steel parts against the table surface cut through the silence like a metronome running counter rhythm to the string quartet playing on the television screen. Two worlds existing at the same moment. There's champagne flutes catching chandelier light, a five-tier cake rolled out on a gilded cart, my mother air-kissing the cheeks of women whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. Mine gun oil on a plastic tablecloth, a kitchen faucet that dripped every 9 seconds, and the distant smell of the last fire David had fought still clinging to his turnout coat hanging by the door. The camera cut to a wide shot of the ceremony itself. Isabella stood under an arch of white roses that must have cost more than our mortgage. Richard, tall, angular jaw, the kind of tan you get on yachts, slid a ring onto her finger. My mother stood in the second row, hands clasped in front of her chest, beaming the way mothers are supposed to beam at their daughters' weddings. She hadn't made that face at mine. At mine, she'd cried into a handkerchief and whispered insults to anyone who would listen. I racked the slide back into place, loaded the magazine, set the weapon down. A hard knock rattled the front door. David, still in his turnout pants from a structure fire that morning, walked over and opened it. A private chauffeur in a black cap stood on the porch. Without a word, the man dropped a white styrofoam insulated box onto the concrete step and turned on his heel. David picked it up. On the lid, a handwritten note in red ink. I watched his eyes move across the words. His jaw slowly widened, the masseter muscles swelling until veins pushed against the skin of his neck. He read it aloud, voice flat. "This is leftover shark fin soup from the 5-star hotel. I'm sending it so your broke firefighter husband can taste what rich people eat. Keep your mouth shut and stay in your rat hole." My mother's signature, that dramatic cursive M, slashed across the bottom of the page. David stared at the note for 3 seconds. Then he closed it. He carried the box, a container holding food that probably cost more than our grocery bill for a month, walked it calmly out to the side of the house, popped the lid of our rusted tin garbage can, and dropped it in. The lid crashed down with a sound like a judge's gavel. He walked back inside, sat down next to me, picked up a clean cloth, and started helping me wipe down the barrel. Neither of us said a word. There was nothing to say. Dignity is not something you can buy with scraps from a rich man's table. And it is damn sure not something you can kill with a note written in red ink. We sat like that for 20 minutes. Oil and silence. Then the television signal scrambled into static. At the exact same moment, a deep vibration rolled through the floor, the unmistakable growl of heavy-duty engines, multiple vehicles rumbling closer on the asphalt outside. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. This wasn't a neighbor's pickup truck. This was the coordinated sound of a tactical convoy. David shot to his feet. He crossed to the window in 2 strides, parted the curtain with 2 fingers, and looked out. The color drained from his face in real time. "Veronica." His voice dropped to a register I'd only heard him use inside burning buildings. "I don't think they're here for a drug bust. They are pointing directly at our front door." I walked out onto the porch with my hands loose at my sides. 4 black SUVs with federal government plates had screeched into position, forming a V-shaped blockade that sealed every exit from our property. 12 men, tall, broad-shouldered, black suits, mirrored sunglasses, coiled earpieces, stepped out in unison like a machine with 24 legs. Their right hands hovered at their hips, fingertips brushing concealed holsters. These were not county sheriffs, not state police. Every detail, the formation, the plates, the postures screamed, one thing: federal. I clasped both hands behind my back at parade rest and watched them approach. My breathing was even. 4 in 4, hold, 4 out. The drill doesn't care whether you're facing enemy fire or a wall of government suits. The lead agent broke from the formation and walked straight toward me. He had a thin white scar running from the corner of his left eye down to his jawline, the kind of scar that comes from close quarters work, not a shaving accident. He stopped exactly 2 paces from the porch step. "Lieutenant Veronica Vasquez." His voice was steel cable pulled tight. No room for negotiation in that tone. "Correct." I locked onto his pupils and held. He gave a single nod. "Washington knows who you are, Lieutenant. A special VIP has requested your immediate presence at an event currently in progress. He pulled a black leather badge wallet from his inside pocket and held it open at chest height. The gold eagle seal of the federal government caught the porch light and threw a flash across my eyes. I narrowed my eyes. The timing was a blind spot in the logic. Federal tactical assets showing up at my house on the exact same afternoon as a society wedding I'd been banned from attending that was either a spectacular coincidence or a thread I hadn't seen yet. I didn't move. The lead agent read my hesitation. He took one step closer, calmly lifted the edge of his suit jacket to reveal the matte black grip of a holstered Glock, and lowered his voice to a frequency meant for my ears only. Operation Codename Mediterranean Dawn. 6 years of frozen classified buried data detonated inside my skull like a flashbang. Every detail I'd sealed away: the burning SUV, the shattered glass, the old man's hand, 4 hours of pressure on a neck wound, roared back in a single compressed second. I knew exactly who was calling me, and I knew exactly why. A cold half-smile crept across my face, the kind of smile that makes people check their exits. Give me exactly 5 minutes. I turned and walked back inside, opened the hallway closet, pushed aside David's fire jackets and my old patrol bags, until my fingers found the dry cleaning bag at the back. I unzipped it and pulled out my dress whites, pristine, bleached to a blinding white, pressed with creases that could cut paper. I put them on piece by piece with the precision of a pre-mission equipment check. Trousers first, seams aligned with the crease of my shoes. Jacket button throat to waist, each brass button catching the hallway light. Every medal and ribbon pinned to the millimeter on my left breast. The places I'd been, the prices I'd paid, the things I'd done that nobody at that wedding could begin to comprehend. Officers' caps set low, the brim shadowing my brow, cutting my face in half between light and dark. White gloves pulled snug over each finger, one at a time, smoothing the fabric across each knuckle. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back was not the one who had stood in her mother's kitchen that morning, swallowing insults and tasting blood. This woman had a jaw set like a rifle bolt, locked forward, eyes that gave nothing away, a uniform that had absorbed sand, saltwater, blood, and smoke from 3 continents, and still came out white on the other side. David stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me transform. He didn't ask where I was going, didn't ask why, didn't ask what was about to happen. He just looked at me and nodded once. One single dip of the chin. That nod contained more trust than 1,000 words from 1,000 people. When I pushed the screen door open and stepped back onto that porch for the second time, I was not the daughter my family had thrown away. I was a loaded weapon hammer, cocked safety off, aimed directly at the stage of their lies. I sat in the back seat of the lead SUV. The armored convoy ripped down the interstate at 90 miles per hour, priority sirens, screaming, shredding the afternoon quiet. Civilian cars scrambled to the shoulder like startled cattle. I sat perfectly still, legs crossed at the ankle, one gloved finger tracing the edge of the ribbon bar on my chest. Through the tinted window, strip malls and subdivisions blurred into a gray smear. The lead agent behind the wheel floored the accelerator. The engine's RPM climbed until the frame shuddered. 45 minutes. That's all it took before the convoy banked hard onto a private road lined with 100-year-old oak trees heading straight for the lakeside estate. Private security, 4 men in gray blazers with earpieces of their own, rushed to drag a wrought iron gate across the entrance. The lead agent in the passenger seat simply extended his arm out the window and held up a gold-plated federal shield. The gate swung open before the first SUV even touched the brakes. All 4 vehicles blasted through without slowing. Tires crunched over a manicured gravel drive, veered around a marble fountain, spewing water into the golden afternoon light, and ground straight across the red carpet that had been rolled out for the Billionaire guests. The valet attendants in white jackets dove out of the way. A waiter carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes dropped the entire thing, glass shattering across the flagstone like a starting gun. The string quartet on the terrace mid-sonata went dead silent. Bows froze on strings. 300 heads turned in unison. Doors popped open simultaneously. 12 agents fanned out in a crescent perimeter, jackets unbuttoned, hands visible and ready. Then I stepped out. My black leather shoes struck the marble entry with a sound that echoed off the stone columns. Late afternoon sun hit the dress whites, and every piece of metal on my chest blazed. I clasped my hands behind my back and walked through the center of the agent formation at a measured pace, unhurried, deliberate, the stride of an officer conducting a formal review. The whispers hit like waves. I could feel 500 pairs of eyes recalibrating everything they thought they knew about this wedding, this family, this day. I swept my gaze across the terrace and locked onto the center VIP table. Found them instantly. My mother's face had turned the color of wet cement. Her jaw was rigid, clamped shut. Her right hand trembled so violently that the crystal champagne flute she was holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the flagstone. Isabella sat frozen beside her, the diamond tiara on her head listing to one side, face drained to a gray I'd only seen on people in shock. Richard the groom, the billionaire, the man who was supposed to be the crown jewel of this entire charade, stumbled backward out of his chair, sweat darkening the collar of his bespoke tuxedo. They understood now. The beggar they had humiliated with leftover soup and a note written in red ink, the nobody they had banned from their kingdom, had just walked back in with an army that could dismantle everything they'd built. The crowd of billionaires parted down the middle like a curtain being drawn. They made way reverently, instinctively for a white-haired man walking slowly through the gap. Arthur Sterling, former Secretary of State, the man Wall Street whispered about as the Godfather. A single phone call from him could freeze credit lines, shutter mergers, reroute entire rivers of capital. He leaned on a mahogany cane with a silver handle, but his back was straight and his eyes were clear and sharp. I snapped my heels together and executed a textbook regulation salute. Crisp, full extension, held. Sterling didn't salute back. He dropped his cane. It clattered on the marble. He stepped forward and wrapped both of his hands around mine and squeezed with a grip that still carried the strength of a man who'd survived a war zone. His voice, deep, warm, and loud enough for every person in earshot to hear, rolled across the terrace. Lieutenant Vasquez, Washington owes you, and I personally owe you my life. 500 guests went absolutely silent. Sterling released my hands and jerked his chin toward the main house. The agents moved without a word, herding my mother Isabella and Richard through a set of French doors into a private VIP parlor. The doors closed. Sterling crossed the room in 4 heavy strides, planted his cane on the hardwood floor, and turned on my mother with a voice that could strip paint off a warship. This afternoon you told me to my face that she was deployed on a classified mission and couldn't attend. You banned my savior from this building. He leaned forward on the cane, knuckles white. You lied to me. My mother's composure crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Sweat beaded on her upper lip. Sir, you misunderstand. I was only trying to protect her identity, her safety. Sterling slammed the cane against the floor so hard it cracked a tile. Shut your mouth. The words came out low, controlled, and 10 times more terrifying than a shout. Did you think I wouldn't find out that you mortgaged your own house to loan sharks? That you piled a fake socialite disguise on your older daughter to trick this man? He pointed the cane at Richard like a bayonet, into a marriage built on fraud. The room was a vacuum. No one breathed. Richard turned slowly toward Isabella. The look on his face was not anger. It was the specific revulsion of a man who just realized he's been sleeping next to a stranger. Isabella's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her perfect lipstick trembled. Sterling pulled back, straightened to his full height, and extended his arm toward me, palm open like a prosecutor presenting his final exhibit to a jury. 6 years ago in the Mediterranean, my diplomatic convoy was ambushed. My entire security detail was killed. My vehicle was on fire with me trapped inside. His voice carried the weight of a man who had replayed that moment every night since. This woman, Lieutenant Veronica Vasquez, disobeyed a direct order to hold position. She sprinted 200 meters through active gunfire. She smashed my window open with a pistol butt, dragged me out of a burning vehicle, and shielded my body from a grenade blast with her own flesh for 4 hours straight. He paused. Let it settle. She refused every dollar of reward money. She asked for her file to be classified. She never told a soul. Richard's legs gave out. He grabbed the back of a chair and sank into it, staring at the floor. The equation had just recalculated itself in his head with devastating clarity. His wife's family, the family that had pitched itself as old money aristocrats, The family whose mother had personally assured him they came from generational wealth had been running a con. Isabella's designer wardrobe, the society connections, the charity galas, the stories about European trust funds, all of it was scaffolding built on stolen combat pay and loan shark money. And the woman they'd spit on, the one they'd called a broke nobody, the one they'd sent leftover soup to with a note calling her husband a rat. That woman had pulled the most powerful man in Richard's financial orbit out of a burning vehicle with her bare hands and never asked for a cent. Isabella opened her mouth, tried to speak, managed 3 syllables of something that might have been Richard's name, and then her voice collapsed. She looked at my mother. My mother looked at the floor. Neither of them had a single word left. Every syllable of their vocabulary had been built for a world that no longer existed. Sterling didn't give anyone time to recover. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm, his hand still carrying the tremor from adrenaline, and pulled me back through the French doors into the main hall. He walked straight to the stage, snatched the microphone from the bewildered band leader, and let his voice detonate across 500 stunned faces. Wall Street, you can price anything. Stocks, futures, real estate, human beings. He let that last phrase hang in the air like smoke. But you will never not in 1,000 years scrape together enough capital to buy the honor and the integrity of this soldier. The chandelier above my head threw a cone of white light directly onto my uniform. 500 of the most powerful people in American finance rose from their seats in a single unified motion. The applause didn't build gradually. It exploded, a wall of sound that shook the stemware on the tables. I stood in that light, hands clasped behind my back, chin level. I did not smile. I did not cry. I looked straight ahead and let the moment wash over my mother and my sister like a tidal wave of shame that no amount of borrowed money would ever clean off. That moment when every layer of fraud was ripped away in front of hundreds of witnesses was an absolute liberation. If you've ever ached to see those who build their lives on lies pay the real price for their selfishness, hit that like button on this video and tell me your story in the comments. I slipped away from the crowd of handshakes and congratulations and stepped out onto the second-floor balcony. The evening air hit my face. Below, the lake reflected the last strip of orange light on the horizon. I leaned both gloved hands on the stone railing and let my lungs expand for what felt like the first time in 12 hours. Behind me, the slow click of heels on tile. Hesitant, uneven. The rhythm of someone whose legs were no longer cooperating with their pride. My mother appeared first. The woman who had held her chin at a 45-degree angle that morning, who had ground her stiletto into my invitation, who had signed that red ink note with a flourish. She now stood with her shoulders caved inward, arms wrapped around her own ribs, mascara tracked down both cheeks in black rivers. Veronica. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Mama was wrong. I'm sorry. She choked on a sob. Please talk to Richard for us. Just one word. Sterling froze the project. The bank is calling in the loan. Mama is going to lose the house. I've lost everything, baby. Everything. I didn't turn around. Isabella came next. She rushed forward and grabbed the sleeve of my dress uniform with both fists, knuckles, white mascara, smeared tiara gone. Her confession poured out in a desperate, ugly flood. I lied to Richard. I told him that I was the one sending you money, that I was bankrolling your poor military life because I pitied you. She gasped for air between words. If he finds out the truth that I was draining your combat pay to build this whole fake persona, he'll destroy us. All of us. You have to save me. Please. There it was. The final mask torn off by her own hands. The woman who had let our mother call me a parasite, who had smiled while filing her nails as I was thrown out of the family, had been telling her billionaire husband that she was my benefactor. That she was the generous one. That I was the charity case. The disgust that rose through my chest was physical, a hot, oily pressure that tasted like bile. Every cent I'd earned in a combat zone, every dollar that came with the fine print of, "You might not come home to spend this," had been siphoned through a straw into Isabella's closet. And she had had the audacity to flip the narrative. To tell her billionaire husband that she was the generous sister, the one carrying the burden of a poor soldier who couldn't make it on her own. She hadn't just stolen my money, she'd stolen my story, rewritten it with herself as the hero and me as the beggar. I wrenched my sleeve out of her grip with a single sharp motion. The force sent her stumbling backward on her heels. She caught herself on the stone railing, mascara dripping onto the marble. I turned around, faced them both, and when I spoke, each word came out compressed, nailed down, packed tight as a round, seated in a brass casing. Listen carefully, both of you. You are not crying here because you feel guilty for what you did to me. You are begging because your money is on fire. I took one step forward. They both flinched. In the military, when someone stabs a fellow soldier in the back, they are stripped of rank and permanently expelled. No hearing, no appeal. I paused. Let the silence cut. I forgive you both as blood. But the respect between us, the trust, the loyalty, every single thread died the night you threw my invitation on the floor and ground your heel into it. My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back. Go put out the fire you started with your own matches. I am a warrior. I do not negotiate with traitors. I pulled off both white gloves one finger at a time and tucked them into my leather belt. Turned on my heel. Walked away from that balcony in long measured, unbreakable strides. The wind caught the back of my jacket and lifted it behind me. The sharp rhythm of my heels on marble faded into the distance, leaving my mother and sister doubled over the railing, sobbing into the wreckage of the paper kingdom they had spent a lifetime building and demolished in a single day. That evening, I declined Mr. Sterling's invitation to a private dinner. Politely, firmly. I climbed into the government vehicle alone and rode back to the small house on the east side of town. When I turned the familiar doorknob, the one that squeaked on every rotation because neither of us had gotten around to oiling it, the scene on the other side stopped me in my tracks. David was standing in our narrow kitchen. His forehead still had a smear of black soot from the structure fire he'd run into that afternoon, hours before federal agents turned our driveway into a staging area. He saw me in the doorway, still in full dress whites metals, catching the overhead light, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Just one side. That small, quiet, unshakable smile that had anchored me through every deployment, every phone call from my mother, every night I'd spent questioning whether I was worth anything at all. He opened his arms. I crossed that kitchen in 3 steps and buried my face in his chest. His t-shirt smelled like smoke, that acrid layered scent of charred wood and melted plastic and sweat that never fully washes out. There was no black Amex card tucked in his pocket. No designer cologne. No portfolio summary folded inside his wallet. Just 2 arms that wrapped around me and blocked every storm that had been raging outside our door since 6 o'clock that morning. I closed my eyes, listened to his heartbeat steady, unhurried, the 64 beats per minute resting pulse of a man who runs into burning buildings for a living and never talks about it at dinner. And I knew with the kind of certainty that doesn't require evidence or argument that at this exact second, standing in a kitchen with a leaky faucet and a dented refrigerator, I was the wealthiest woman on the planet. The aftermath for the others wrote itself in red ink. The next morning, Richard's attorney filed for divorce, asset protection. He'd spent $40 million on a wedding built on forged credentials, and the prenuptial agreement his legal team had drafted, the one Isabella had signed without reading the fraud clause buried on page 19, activated like a landmine. She would walk away with nothing. Not the penthouse, not the cars, not the credit lines, nothing. She'd entered that marriage wearing a costume purchased with stolen money, and now the costume was being repossessed along with everything it had bought her. My mother's house went to the bank within the week. The high-interest loan she'd taken out from private lenders to manufacture a socialite identity for Isabella, the one Sterling had exposed in front of 500 witnesses, came due, and there was no one left to call. No one left to bleed. The phone numbers she'd relied on for decades, the daughter who always answered, the daughter who always sent money, the daughter who always absorbed the blow, those numbers were deadlines now. She texted me every Sunday. Long messages soaked in tears and scripture and apologies that all circled back to the same request. Talk to Sterling, make one phone call, fix this. I never opened a single one. I scrolled to her contact, pressed the block icon, and set the phone face down on the counter. Cutting a tumor out of your own body, especially one that shares your blood type, is the most painful surgery a person can perform on themselves. But it is the only way the body survives. David handed me a cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. The mug was chipped on the rim. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd cleaned my sidearm 8 hours ago, and we drank in silence, watching the first light of morning push through the window above the sink. No champagne, no string quartet, just two people who had earned every square inch of the quiet surrounding them. The strongest person alive is not the one perched on a throne of money, wearing a borrowed crown, passing judgment on the worth of everyone below. The strongest person alive is the one who refuses to kneel, even when the blade in their back was driven there by their own flesh and blood. Honor is the last armor standing, and the truth will always be the most savage weapon ever forged. I crossed every traitor's name off the list with my own hand to protect my dignity as a soldier. If this story puts enough fire in your chest to draw a hard line against the toxic people in your life, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop your story in the comments below. Don't ever kneel before someone else's manipulation.